we talk a lot about modeling and digital compositing, look dev, concept, matte painting, camera projections. But for those of you that are new to visual effects, and I'm assuming a lot of you are, it probably would make sense if we actually took a look at what does a visual effects studio actually look like as far as how do you get something done? What are the various roles that artists would be handling? What things plug into each other? What's the beginning of the process and what's the end of the process? Digital compositing, which is what we're talking about mostly in this course, comes at the end of the VFX pipeline because it's bringing in all the elements that were created beforehand to make it look like a final shot. And although you may think, does it really make sense to start at the end? And it does, because this course not only teaches you visual effects compositing, but it teaches you basically about color, light, cameras, how our eye sees, and how computer graphics actually work. So I'm going to give you a quick overview on the VFX pipeline and what a typical studio would go through and a bunch of artists would go through to get something done. And we're assuming that the movie was already shot and the shots are broken out and sent to a visual effects studio to say, hey, we need some visual effects on these specific shots. And the first place that this happens is called plate prep. And what a plate actually is the movie itself. The plate is the footage. So if you ever hear anybody ever say something about, what's in the plate, or is that in the plate? They're talking about, is it actually in the footage itself? And at this stage, you're actually preparing the footage to put stuff on top of or take things away in visual effects. Plate prep artists, they clean up the backgrounds of live action footage ready for the effects to be layered onto it by the compositor and many other departments. This includes clean plating, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is basically fixing the footage, dust busting if there's any little artifacts or errors in the footage, basic grading, color space conversion, conforming, proxy rendering, things of that nature. Usually done pretty quickly by perhaps an editor. A VFX artist, this isn't a dedicated discipline, apart from what the editor is actually going to do. But plate prep is pretty important because you want to make sure you're working on the footage that may already be pre-graded, or maybe you need to work on raw footage, and we'll talk all about that a little bit later on. But the real work begins after you get the footage. And usually the first place it goes is the MATCHMOVE track. And in the most simplest terms, this is taking the real camera from the set or location and converting it to a CG camera. What MATCHMOVE and track actually does is it takes the extraction of the camera move from a live action plate in order to duplicate it in the CG environment. If you had shot that hill with a real camera and that is the plate because you planned on putting a CG robot back there, well, you need to duplicate that camera exactly. Otherwise, it's never going to line up. The movement is going to shift. The robot's going to look like he's sliding all over the place. It's probably not going to be the same focal length. It's not going to be the same perspective or tilt. So you need to make sure that the cameras match up. Unlike 2D tracking, 3D tracking is intended to recreate the full 3D movement of the camera that photographed a particular scene. We're going to talk about different types of 2D tracking in this course. And in digital compositing 2, we're going to jump into 3D tracking as well as the other MATCHMOVE course as well. Then the plate and everything goes to rotoscope and paint. And in rotoscope and paint, oftentimes you don't have the luxury of shooting against a green screen or things that need to be fixed, or maybe crew or someone is visible, or rigging, safety harnesses, or just part of the set that doesn't look good needs to be fixed. For example, this bike rider here, if some reason they didn't like the background, they wanted a more interesting background, maybe a big city back there. Well, this bicyclist was never shot over a green screen or a blue screen, so there's no keying that's going to be able to be extracted. So someone is going to have to basically trace all of the footage that needs to be cut out of it, frame by frame, including motion blur, and you're going to use that to create the traveling matte. This is often a place where a lot of new artists begin, and this sets you on a great path to get into digital compositing. Rotoscope paint is easy to learn, hard to master. So, a visual effects shot is only as strong as the foundation of the work. And if the rotoscope and the paint is weak, the whole shot's going to fall apart. So it's very important. It's the process of creating a traveling mat or mats on a frame-by-frame basis by hand using splines. People do this in Nuke. They do it in Silhouette. They do it in Mocha. There's a lot of great tools to do this. Paint, on the other hand, refers to digital brushes and tools to clone pixel patterns, remove large imperfections in the plate. They could fix makeup. They could do whole face replacements. So that's often the case with Roto and paint. At the same time this is going on, the concept team is hard at work. And the concept team is basically people thinking up and illustrating what things are ultimately going to look like. This is an actual image from Ralph McQuire, who was a famous concept painter for Star Wars. And as you can see, Darth Vader there, he actually has that mask on. And the reason why Darth Vader has that mask, it wasn't intended for him to wear that mask the entire movie of Star Wars. At the very first scene, when the two ships were meeting up, the Star Destroyer had taken over the smaller ship, Tantive 4, that Darth Vader needed a helmet to walk outside in space to get to the other ship. And that's why Ralph McQuire created that helmet. And Lucas loved the look of it so much, he just kept it on Darth Vader the whole time. But as you can see, this is an early version of Luke Skywalker also having some mask of his own for breathability. But anyway, concept. The main goal of concept art is to convey a visual representation of a design, an idea, or a mood before it's put into the final product. And often scores of concept art is produced with only a few solutions selected to move forward. Previously unseen by the public, concept art books are now very popular. So it's always great to see the ideas they threw away or the ideas that evolved into the final form. So concept books are very, very popular. The matte painting department gets to work very early on as well, usually based on what the concept artists are doing, but also the matte painters are concept artists in their own right. Matte paintings, we all know what matte paintings are because that's kind of into the common pop culture of visual effects. Matte paintings are digital or hand-painted images, usually intended to be photorealistic, although not always the case, that is combined with live action footage. And they were traditionally static shots, but they're now capable of pretty far movement, usually with what's called 2.5D, which we will also learn in one of our later digital compositing courses. Advanced camera movement usually requires the use of 3D set extensions and extensive match moves. But matte paintings, if you're interested in matte paintings, there's a whole section of it in our other course, Intro to Visual Effects. Take a look at that. But the matte paintings are hard. Matte painting artists are hard at work right now, cranking away, and they're going to need camera projections. They may do their own camera projections. But oftentimes what camera projections often are is it's a CG technique in which an image is projected from the camera onto a 3D object. Camera projections, in a nutshell, are shortcuts. And you really need to do a lot of shortcuts in visual effects because there's just so much work involved. And if you're not doing shortcuts, then you're not working efficiently. And all that really matters at the end of the day is, does the shot work? Does it read? And is it believable? And if you could do a shot in 2 hours that would have taken somebody else 20 hours to do, but the results are the same, then your way is probably the better way to do it. But this technique is useful for recreating a simulation of a 3D environment using photographs. You can project a photo of rocks onto a low-resolution mesh model, and it looks basically like perfect rocks, depending on how it's done. So it's a great way to kind of get a lot of work done quickly. It's a great way to create a large environment very quickly. Used extensively in matte paintings and set extensions. When the Avengers are fighting in New York City, a lot of those elements built around them after they're keyed out are, of course, camera projections of building textures on low-res geometry. The modeling department gets right to work based on what the concept artists have created and what is approved. One of my favorite departments, 3D modeling. It is essential to creating things that aren't practical, cost-effective, or even possible on set, like the Incredible Hulk, right? He doesn't really exist, so you have to model him. Normally, you could have done it with stop motion, you could have done it with animation, or you could have done it with a really big, strong guy like Lou Ferrigno just putting green paint on, but it's not going to have the same look or effect as the modern Incredible Hulk, because he's just absolutely huge. But being one of the first groups involved in the post-production process, modelers are hard at work creating 3D assets, such as props and buildings and vehicles and weapons and basically everything to fulfill the director's vision.